the clockwork of it, going in the train station and they have the train arrival like listed by the second, when it's
Yeah,
coming
it
in.
is. It's very interesting because I used to live right on the border, and it was very interesting even to take the bus in the morning. So I used to take a French bus that went over the border into Switzerland, and in France, if it arrived 5 or 10 minutes late, no big deal. And then you go over the border, which is literally 5 minutes away, and if a train is 30 seconds late, the passengers are pointing at their watch at the poor driver.
Right. That's incredible. It's amazing how many different cultures there are in those European areas too. It's fascinating. It's also amazing how expensive a sandwich is in Switzerland.
Everything is expensive in Switzerland, but
Oh my God.
Why you live in France, isn't it?
Yeah, but basically, I actually, and I live about 1 kilometer from Germany, so to get into work every day, I go through 3 countries. So I came over here years ago, and a guy gave me advice. He said, live in France, work in Switzerland, and spend your money in Germany. So I'm trying to do that ever since.
Nice.
That's cool. That's cool.
That's great.
Well, Todd's joined us.
Todd has arrived. Hello, Todd. I'm sorry if you couldn't get in earlier. I had some glitches with seeing the waiting room.
Well, I was late too. I had a meeting. The guy just went and stopped talking. So sometimes that happens.
Okay. Well, that's where you're supposed to say, yes, Ethan, I was frustrated in the waiting room.
Right.
Instead of actually being late.
Yeah. Don't be honest. Anyways, are you?
Todd's on a closed road too, so just keep that in mind too.
Yeah.
There's no through traffic in Todd's on Todd's road, so
a rough place to be.
Hey, Todd, your microphone volume is a little low, so I don't know if
is it? All right.
Yeah.
So, do you want me to? I guess I can give our standard intro here, but then give the reins to you if you want. Does that sound good, Rob?
Yeah. Let's do that.
Find that. Let's see here. Okay, so I'll read that out, and then by the time I'm done, you guys will be settled, ready to go.
Yeah.
We're live on Facebook, YouTube right now. Just for those who are unfamiliar with the project, this is a business podcast mastermind that started with a few talented friends in the business and podcasting space. We expanded to create a weekly event where a wider audience can join. Here you have Rob Green-Lee. He can give you a wave. He's the VP of Content and Partnerships at Libsyn, chair of the Podcast Academy, co-host of the New Media Show, and longtime evangelist of the podcasting industry. Henry Lopez, I think he's cutting out because of Thanksgiving this week, but I'll let you know he's a serial entrepreneur that is also a small business coach and host of the top-rated How of Business podcast, dedicated to helping others start, run, and grow their small businesses. And then Vinay is the host, Vinay Koshi is the host of the Predictable B2B podcast, founder of Sproutworth. He helps others achieve predictable business growth and influence through content marketing. And finally, I'm Ethan Janney, business and executive coach and co-host of the Run With It podcast, which invites 7+ figure entrepreneurs to share business ideas and the action steps to launch them. So with that having been said, I thought I saw Vinay in here, jump in here. Maybe
I thought I saw it too, but maybe not.
Okay. Well, I should be able to see, maybe I have to go back and.
Yeah, I don't see him in the.
I might be out of the room. I'm sorry.
The attendee list.
Out of the room for a minute because I got to go to my other computer. Anyways.
Right. Okay.
I'll hand it over to you, Rob, and I'll be right back.
Okay. Well, I wanted to invite Todd Cochran to come in and talk a little about the topic of SEO and podcasting, but I should probably say who Todd Cochran is. He's the CEO of Blueberry Podcasting, which is a large podcast hosting platform that's been around since the very beginning. Well, that platform hasn't really been around since the beginning of podcasting, but Todd has been around podcasting since the very beginning of podcasting. And he and I both do a show together called the New Media Show every Saturday and Wednesday together, talking about the industry of podcasting. So Todd's been a longtime evangelist for SEO and podcasting. So I consider him to be kind of an expert in that area. So Todd, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah. So we should probably start out maybe the research. I know the Edison research has come out with some new findings that podcasters are finding podcasts more and more in search, which I know, Todd, you've been an evangelist of for a long time, but it looks like the research is starting to showing that that's the number one way people are finding podcasts today. And so that's why, this topic is so important, I believe, as we look to the future of discovery of podcasts. The Google folks are getting involved in podcasting more and more, so you can kind of see how that might be ramping up as an important area. So, Todd, what's important to you as you think about SEO for podcasts?
Well, I look back to the past.
Right.
I was a blogger first,
Mm-hmm.
and I understood, that was pre 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And very quickly, when I started doing my podcast, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Twitter, we didn't have everything we have now in social media. And the only way you could get found is through search.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you guys remember the days where you had to go and submit to Yahoo and you'd be downlinked in some subdirectory. There was really this almost full-time job of trying to get your content found and get it indexed. And then when Google really came on the scene and changed the business forever, those of us that had been doing the optimization to be found had to learn a whole bunch of new tricks because Google started applying all kinds of rules, and every 3 months we'd all have to make a little bit of adjustment. But the premises I've always promoted for many, many years is that you record your podcast for your audience and you write for Google. And when you write for Google, you write for, a good headline, good backup topic that goes to support the headline. And then you build authority and trust on your website by getting reputable people to link to you
Mm-hmm.
and not linking to unreputable sites. So it's not much more complicated than that. But I think that the way I looked at it was that was my primary source of new listeners. So, some people were use social media as their primary way to get new listeners. My show, and the reason why I have GoDaddy as a sponsor for 15 years straight, is because I continually feed new people in the front door, while people that have listened for a couple of years go out the back door and go on to another show because they're sick of listening to me. I got to keep feeding that beast. I got to keep feeding the subscriptions to the show. So my philosophy from the beginning is you got to get them from web search traffic, because I just don't know that many people on social media to feed the animal. So for me, SEO has been everything.
So as you look looking at the past, and then you look at where we are today, how do you think the strategy of getting found in Google has changed because of the evolution of Google and kind of the integration of Google Podcasts, Todd?
Well, I think it's not only is it important what you're doing now, but going forward, it's going to be even more important because a lot of people were satisfied by purely finding their show in Google search results.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the game now. The game is to have your episodes be found and have that ranking in the 1 or 2 or 3 spot on Google. And if you're ranking high in those episode search results, when Google continues to manipulate their algorithm and figure out what they're going to do for the content within the show, not just the headline of the show, you're going to probably rank pretty high. If you don't rank good in the episode levels now, in 2 to 3 years, when Google really starts indexing and able to figure out the context of content within podcasts and be able to start using that as a search ranking factor, it's all going to play together over time. Being able to give Google time hacks on where content topics changed and give them contextual information that their AI can learn, because the AI is already making a transcript of our shows. They're using that internally, but the AI is really not smart enough, at least from what I'm seeing yet,
Mm-hmm.
to determine when we stop talking about cell phones and start talking about Coke. In a show, the topic may not be that dramatic of a change, but Google really doesn't know yet that I've stopped talking about phones, and they're thinking I'm having a Coke with talking about a cell phone. So we have to give Google something contextually to feed upon in our metadata so that they can say, oh yeah, now they switched to talking about Coca-Cola, the company, or Coca-Cola, the drink, versus Samsung Galaxy S20.
Yeah, I just wonder if the algorithm that we're going to see come in to analyze the audio, because that's what you're talking about here, is
Yeah.
going to be smart enough to be able to dissect context at the level that I think that we would like them to, maybe, or they would like it to do, or whether or not we're going to have to think about our shows a little bit differently when we produce them, to help that algorithm properly index our shows. Have you thought about that, Todd?
I don't know if we're going to need to program differently, but we're going to have to spoon feed them initially some trigger. And I'm doing that on my personal website by providing time hacks for topic changes. But,
Okay.
so I do that in post though.
But
So
in the content, do you think that we need to segment our topics a little bit more and not blend them together too much? What do you think?
I think if you do, you're going to have to figure out a way to transition it so it's not weird.
Right.
I don't know if I've got an answer for that right now. When I do my news show, it's easy to transition from topic to topic,
Right.
because I'll change the, okay, now we're going to talk about this and change the topic. But when you're having a conversation with 2 or 3 people, I'm not so sure that's going to be possible. But 90% of probably what we say here is filler words. So they're going to be looking for trigger words to determine which topic we're talking about. Like if we've said SEO 10 times, they're going to know we're talking about SEO.
Yeah, it just seems like they can go through and they can segment out our content, maybe create areas that they can link to, right, that would be deep into the content, right? It gets back to authority, right? I would think most people, if they search for something, so if you use the analogy of what's going on in YouTube, right? People search for solutions, or they search for a topic, right, that they have an interest in. They'll pull up a short clip of a video, right, that can train them how to, mow their lawn or something like that. I just wonder if there's a contextual orientation that we can think of in that same vein with podcasting as we think of Google in the future. And but I think the key is the authority of the person talking about the subject. And I'm just wondering how you think that might play as well, Todd. Is there any?
Authority is, they don't do necessarily page rank anymore with Google, but everyone still has a certain amount of authority, and you can tell very quickly
Right.
you screwed something up because your search traffic goes down. But I think there's some initiatives going on right now. To your point, Rob, the Podcast Index has a new tag out where you can actually write like a headline and then say, give it a start point and then how many ever seconds, and it'll tell the player how long to play. But that is great for an audience member trying to listen to just a segment. But how do we train Google to recognize that as an authoritative segment? We don't know if they will, and maybe they'll say, "Oh, this is if I've." But there's also it's opened up the room for spammers too, because lots of people do SEO black hat stuff that's always trying to game the system. So I'm sure there's going to be a certain number of folks out there trying to game any advantage in the audio contextualizing to get people to click through on stuff. But Google ends up being pretty smart and able to figure that out pretty quick. So that'll be short lived. But tools like Headliner that allows you to break content out, I think is good. I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where we're going to have to produce segments. I would hope not. But this is a lot of work. I can't even get podcasters to write good headlines and good show notes, Rob. So when we start talking about them putting out or identifying 10 segments in their show,
right,
that's an extra 30 minutes worth of work in production. Are we going to get them to do that when we can't get them to write good headlines?
Yeah, and I guess that's a good kind of segue to getting back to the basics here a little bit and talking about the basics of what drives discovery, right, in Google. As you look at, well, frankly, even Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any of these platforms, what those platforms are looking for, um, you know, to help audiences find the content, and it's the keywords that you put in your title, your description. Some of the platforms I know look at series or episode level metadata as well, but it still seems like that most of them are primarily looking at title and series and metadata. We're not really into the advanced discovery stage yet, even though, transcripts are being pulled, but I just don't think it's being utilized quite yet. I don't know what you think about that.
Oh no, I think we're in early days yet, but last live event we had where I could actually talk to Google team members, I went over 3 or 4 times and I would say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And they're just like Apple. They can't be committal, but after you ask the question 5 different ways and say, am I on track here? And they tell you you're on track, um, but don't give you a timeline. I'm fully believing that the 8,000-pound gorilla known as Google.com is going to either allow a lot more show discovery, or, well, it is going to, for those that pay attention, I think it's going to be a huge driving factor. It's been for my show a driving factor for years. That's why I'm so excited about it, being able to be ready when they bring what new tech they're going to bring to this. And I might be wrong, but at least one thing's for sure, I'm going to have a good index show.
Well, and you've used other techniques too. You've written articles, you're doing videos, you're doing all sorts of stuff to drive that ranking. Talk about that cross promotional aspect of text and video and how that impacts SEO.
Well, I blog. Well, now I pay bloggers. So but for the first 10,000 articles at geeknewscentral.com, I wrote them all, and I'm not a writer. So, but I learned early on that you couldn't just podcast; you had to have supplementary content. So that's one of the reasons why would go to like the Consumer Electronics Show, and there's a whole strategy behind this, and I call it it's basically is what has allowed my show to make millions of dollars. Is that I go to, okay, as an example, the first year I went to the Consumer Electronics Show, I walked around with a little handheld camera and a Marantz recorder and did interviews. And we learned very quickly it was a visual medium. So the second year I went back with a pro consumer camera, a wired microphone, and interviewed people. And one of the people that I interviewed there was the first year GoPro was at the CES, and I interviewed their CEO. I was one of 3 media outlets that gave GoPro any love at CES, where we actually went in their 20 by 20 booth before they become a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate or whatever they are now. We took that interview back, we processed it, we wrote the blog post, and then we did this so cool thing. We emailed the company and said, hey, we got your CEO's interview up on my website. And guess what they did? They linked back to it. So when you have GoPro, which is a new company, linking back to my personal website, and you replicate that 200 times every year, it's pretty amazing the kind of authority you build, because you've got mainstream companies like Microsoft and Sony, and you've got their PR people. Yeah. Okay. Here's the golden nugget. You interview the person as high as you can in the company, because they have egos. And when you get everything done, you make sure that you not only email the PR people, but you email that person you interviewed and said, by the way, your interview's online. Make sure you let your PR people know so they can link it from the website. Well, those egos, well, that CEO will call that PR company or their PR department and say, hey, make sure this gets linked on the blog back to Todd's interview. And for me, spending $25,000 to go with a team to CES people have said, you went to spend $25,000 and took a team to CES? Yeah, and we did 50 hours of live. Those 250 interviews didn't only pay me back. Well, they didn't necessarily pay me back financially, but they paid me back in Google traffic, because we would get anywhere between 600,000 and 3 million views of those 200 videos over the next year, and plus new listeners, plus new Google traffic coming back. So that was, I'm doing a tech show, so it's a little easier to replicate that. If you're doing a business show, what do you have to do? You got to go to a business event and interview some business folks. You can replicate it, but it's not as easy. But for me, it just, I used to laugh every year because I was like, this is like printing money. It really was. And even though we didn't have sponsors oftentimes for the CES content, just the amount of traffic back allowed my GoDaddy sponsorship to thrive, and where I was making as much as 5 figures a month on GoDaddy sponsorships just because of this strategy.
Mm-hmm. So how important is keywords and keyword phrases to what you're doing?
I don't think it's that important. The way I instruct my writing team is write good headlines, write a good native blog post. Don't copy somebody else. And you replicate that enough times, Google starts to understand that you're not a regurgitator of press releases. You're your original news source, and they will treat you well in the rankings.
Can
So
I
it's
interject
also
a quick
yeah,
question
yeah,
here? As I've been
yeah.
wondering.
Yeah, go ahead,
I've been
Evan.
putting some things in the chat. Not sure if you saw, but
Yeah, I'm looking at them.
one quick question was headline versus the title of your episode. So when you say a good headline, are you saying like
Yeah.
I would post my episode as content and then there might be a headline that's different than the title of the episode, or should those two things be the same?
The same. And
Okay.
here's the thing. And I just did this on this last call before I came on here. I looked at my latest blog post, and not blog post, latest podcast post. It was in the headline or title, PayPal competes with GoFundMe, and it's just that term. That's what I, and I take that now and I copy that and I open an incognito window here in my browser. It's important to do that. Open an incognito window, then I do a paste and search for that term. I'm ranked number 2, right below The Verge, for that search result. Now, I hope it comes up with a few more variations, but at least using that exact title, I'm ranked right there with The Verge and Newsbreak and a few other well-known sites. So, okay, so that's just one post. That's going to drive 1,000, 2,000 page hits from Google over the next month, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So what? If I'm putting out 6 new blog posts every month or every week, and I'm getting the same type of results from those search results for those other 6, that's why my site gets between 20,000, it varies every day, between 20,000 and 200,000 hits, and we're talking about web page hits a day of incoming traffic purely from search results.
So is that page views or
page views,
hits?
Page views.
Okay, page views.
In 80% of them leave within 15 seconds of hitting the page.
Right.
But I watch on my Google Analytics, I look how long then do the people really stay that I want to stay. And I have huge hang time on my website because they get there and they stay and they go through 3-4 articles, and then maybe they subscribe to the podcast. And again, a small percentage of the folks that land on the website, maybe 0.25% of 1% subscribe to the show. But when you get 200,000 hits a day or page views coming into the website, that makes pretty good new listenership on a monthly basis.
Yeah, and on all those pages, you have links to your podcast and all that stuff. Right.
Every page, the first thing in the top right is they can subscribe.
Mm-hmm.
So what is this? What did it take to do this? Doing more than just doing my podcast. And that's why I tell podcasters all the time, you can't just, if you want to build a show. Now, there's other ways to build shows. but I use all the ways to build shows. I use Facebook and Twitter, I use social media, all that stuff. But I still think the large majority of new audience for my podcast comes from search results.
So how do you select your headlines or your titles of your episodes, especially when you have a show that has a variety of different topics? I mean, what's the magic that you look for in a topic that makes it to that headline?
I'll go over 30 articles, 25 to 30 articles during a show.
Mm-hmm.
I lead the show with 4 of the most exciting stories for that day. And of those 4, I pick one of those to be the headline. And I always think about, okay, one of the things I talked about in the last show was something to do with something with Amazon. But I just knew people were probably not going to be searching for that term. So I tried to think about what story is, someone's going to hear about PayPal and GoFundMe. They're going to type in PayPal and difference between PayPal and GoFundMe or something to that effect. So I was trying to, I always try to think what is a topic someone's going to search for versus a story that is cool, but will probably never really truly be searched for.
So is that also a factor when you select stories?
I don't, here's the crazy thing. I am an executive producer now. So my executive producer picks all my stories. So he's went through 30 or 35 and I'll probably kill 5 and maybe add 1 or 2, but rarely. He's always found something unique. I got lucky. I found a person that's a mini me when it comes to picking the stories. And, him and I gelled real quickly. But what really, he finds the stories I would have found. And we have a resource we use to pull stories from. But really, it's the day. And you don't hit a home run every time, but very rarely do I not rank well with my post.
Do you ever change those picks from your assistant, but just based on your longstanding experience doing the show? I mean, so like he picks some topics, but you don't agree or something. Is there any kind of a process there?
I kill topics all the time.
Yeah.
And I may add 1 or 2 if I feel I'm short. And then I'll just go to a like Tech Me or something like that as a quick reference. What did he miss? And usually he hasn't missed anything. But
so we have a question from Greg, who's listening here. Do people search Google first, or do they search, do you think, in Spotify or Apple podcasts? That's an interesting question.
If you're looking for a specific show, you're probably going to search on Apple Podcast.
But that's probably off of a recommendation, right?
Probably.
Because people are more likely to keyword search out of Google, right?
Right. They're not coming to look. They're not searching for Geek News Central unless they know about Geek News Central.
But when they do that, more likely in Spotify and Apple Podcasts, they search for the title of the show because they heard it from someone else. But in Google, they're searching for a topic, right?
Usually in Google, they're searching for something they're trying to learn or find out more information.
Exactly.
Just like they would on YouTube.
Yep.
And it's usual textual based. It's not necessarily looking for a video. If Google feeds a YouTube video for the topic, you're done. You lose because that'll be ranked number 1.
Yeah. And the Edison research wasn't really clear on this, specifically what people are searching for that's causing it to be the number 1 way people are finding podcasts. So that's probably a question for Tom Webster to drill in on a little bit, is what people are actually searching for when they find a podcast in Google, right?
Here's the beauty for Greg. They're going to find your show on Apple Podcast.
Right.
But here's the thing. You can't search for episodes on Apple Podcast. You search for shows. Go try to find an episode in Apple Podcast search.
Well, they do list episodes in there. I'm just not sure that it's indexed with a search request that well, right?
People are not necessarily, and if you're searching for a topic, maybe you're going to get maybe more than likely you're going to get a show name that shows up with that in its title,
Right.
or description. But
Though I would imagine that far fewer people are searching in Spotify and Apple Podcasts than are searching in Google, just generally. So
well, again,
right.
and here's another thing too. Where's that web traffic coming from? Is it on a mobile phone or is it on a desktop? My website runs about 80% mobile now.
Right.
So the mobile experience, we're not even getting into that, but the mobile experience has to be good too.
Right.
When it comes to your website, mobile first, by the way. If you're building websites, everything's mobile first now.
Responsive design. That's a requirement now.
And page speed loads. And, there's all those other factors that go into it. But, I'm not an SEO expert by far. I don't read any websites. I don't follow no black hat techniques. Simple instruction, write a good title, write a good description.
Yeah, but you're in the weeds of it, which makes you, knowledgeable about it.
Rob, my rent relies on my GoDaddy sponsorship renewing every month. So
Right.
I have to drive traffic to the show.
Right.
And keep new butts in the seats, because people have been listening to my show for 3 or 4 months. They're not buying GoDaddy products no more. They've already bought. I get paid on new customer acquisition. So I have to have new listeners coming in, setting up new accounts that go, and I have a number I have to meet every month.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily a small number. So I have to drive new people into the show. Now, not everyone else may not be under that pressure. You might be changing sponsors every 60 days. I don't. I run the same sponsor for 15 years.
That's a little unusual.
No, it's a world record. If there was a Guinness Book of World Record, it is. In why? It's because I adopted the strategy that I did, but I didn't know that in the end that was what was going to result. But I can look at my Google Analytics, not my podcast analytics, and I can see, one of my number one pages is a stupid spreadsheet question. It gets like 7,000 views a day. So, I optimized the heck out of that page to make sure people knew there was a podcast.
Yeah.
So
Todd, is there any resources out there that you can think of to help you write good headlines? Is there anything out there, or is it just gut?
for me, it's gut. I'm sure there's 25 different ways to write good headlines. Google search writing good headlines. I'm sure you're going to find every SEO type of article out there on how to write good titles. For me, it's purely I write a headline on what I think other people are going to search for, even though I've got 29 other topics. That's why I continue to be excited about Google. I want them to find the 29 other topics that the headline doesn't cover.
Right.
This is where this is where I get really excited, because if I can have, let's say you do 10 topics in your show, you can write one headline.
Mm-hmm.
What if you can rank number one for those 9 other topics? Because we've trained Google that this topic, here's the topic and here's the start point. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. The game's over.
Todd, do you have any thoughts on being able to do these same techniques with more kind of fictional, reality-based storytelling podcasts? Or is it a completely different game? Have you thought about that?
I haven't thought about that too much, because you're writing, when you're doing that type of content, it's a series.
Mm-hmm.
So your series titles, 1 through whatever, probably should tell a story or the story. But how do we combine that to get good traffic? I don't know. If I was going to approach it, I would probably have a one-off website for every season.
Well, stories have subjects, have topics in them, right? So
maybe it's the same approach. Maybe just write the title as if, someone that's in that genre is going to look for. But if it's fictional, well, it's fictional. You've got a better advantage. You can make up whatever you want.
right. That's true.
So that's the key. It's fiction. If it's a murder thing, what is the headline? Johnny stabbed Tom. Is that the headline for Google? I don't know if that's going to
Yeah.
get results, but
Right. Yeah. I don't know
in
about
this
that.
episode, or
It sounds like a lot of the secret to what is working well for you in terms of headlines is just the newness, right? It's a news type of thing, right? So
Right.
you find stories. It sounds like your focus is finding the things that people are already searching about a story. They probably heard about it someplace else, but they want more info on it. So
Right.
like you said, with this PayPal GoFundMe thing, you're not going to be the first place somebody heard about it. But when they go search about it and they say, yeah, I want to know what's going on with that. They say, yeah, PayPal, GoFundMe, put it in the search bar. And now they go, oh, cool, a podcast episode that I can listen to and check that out. Yeah, I get that. And I think that it sounds like anyone, if they want to go in the direction of being relevant, contemporaneously, right, with the news, they can go that way and say, what are the stories people are searching for, and what are either the things that they're already searching for that you can jump on, or they're searching for something that's a new story, but the information's not there, and you could sort of fill it in, right?
But at the same point, though, if you're doing an interview with somebody, let's say you're doing a business show, there's 50,000 of those. I think you can write a good headline for a business show too. If you really think about what you covered in the show, okay, what did you talk about? What are the words people are going to search for to find out about that topic? You can apply this just as easily on a business show, but you got to think about it a little bit. What would you search for to learn about the topic you just covered in your show? But if you're covering 10 topics, you can only cover one.
And actually, every type of podcast actually is a storytelling podcast. Actually, the more I think about it, the more I think there really isn't any podcasts that aren't storytelling podcasts. It's just how long the stories are. And is it reality or fiction? Those are the only thing. I mean, Todd, you're a storyteller. You just tell 10 different stories.
I tell
right?
30. And sometimes
30
I
or
on my soapbox. Sometimes I yell
Right.
at people. Sometimes my audience yells at me for talking about companies a certain way, So yeah, everything's a story.
Yeah. That's what the whole podcast medium is stories.
Yeah. But, and it's, I've often been chagrined, and maybe that's not the right word. I've often been told you don't need a blog. You don't need a website. Just do your show, be on Apple Podcasts. You want to do that? That's your choice. You build it your way.
Mm-hmm.
But I've just over these years, I built a formula that works for me. You can take it and copy it or throw it out. I don't care. But in the end, I absolutely guarantee my show will rank higher than yours in the search results on an episode basis. And when Google finally gets around to subcontexting content so that I know I've got 30 headlines coming out of a show, that some of those headlines are going to rank on Google, even if they're not in the show title. They're going to rank because I have given Google the information they need to index it. Am I putting a lot of money into that work and time? Yep. Is it a gamble? Yep. But I got my gut feeling here. They have said already, I read it. Let me bring the slide up, Rob. I can find it. It's just so telling. Oh my God. See if I can find it quickly here. Presentations. It'll load it. This statement from Google is it says it all. Let me see if I can find it there.
I'll bring this. I was going to say this, so I'll say this while you're looking. If anybody who's attending here, Mark, Greg, Farisa, if you have comments, questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat, or you can even just unmute yourself and interject.
Right.
We like to open things up towards the end of the show here in the last 10 minutes or so. So feel free. Don't be shy. If you have any burning questions, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Here's what was quoted from Gabe Bender, Google Podcast Product Lead. Google is focused on shifting search away from a show-based discovery to one that includes things like episode topics and people mentioned similar to how articles on the web are found. Let me read that again. Google's focused on shifting search away from a show-based discovery to one that includes things like episode topics and people mentioned similar to how articles on the web are found. He also says, we are excited to ramp up our investment in the podcast space and take on the challenge of solving podcast discovery in 2021 and beyond. Now, when someone from Google says that, if you're not ready, the train will leave the station without you.
Just a quick question, please, Todd. So when you're earlier on in your podcast career, everyone tells you that you should be having evergreen content. You should be having content which can last generations, and people will come back and they will do searches, and you'll have that sort of increase of your listeners increase over time.
Right.
But what you're saying is have it very news focused or searchable topics that are happening at the moment. How do you? Have I missed something?
No.
Yeah. Go ahead, Todd.
My situation is my stuff is timely. My content burns out in 96 hours because it's old news. But true evergreen content with good titles and with good descriptions will stand the test of time. But you have to continue to feed the beast. You got to make sure those links are not dead that are in your blog posts, all those things. I do have a little bit of advantage because stuff is current. But here's something that most folks in podcasting don't realize. Everyone says evergreen is the key, but 90% of podcasts globally deliver 90% of their lifetime downloads within the first 96 hours they're online. So when someone says I've got evergreen content, I often internally chuckle a little bit and I go look at their stats, and yeah, they get some downloads later. But there's only very, very few. Those 10% of shows are worth lots of money that do evergreen really, really well. And if you want to learn how to do evergreen really, really well, you go over and look at Quick and Dirty Tips with Mignon Fogarty and that network from Macmillan and how they do episodes. They have downloads of as many downloads today as they did 5 years ago on episodes in a given month, because they do evergreen the best. No one does it better than them. So if you want to learn how to write titles and produce evergreen content, look at their model and copy it. It's, they just print money over there.
Who was that? Sorry, can you repeat who the people were?
It's Macmillan and the Quick and Dirty Tip Network. Just
Grammar Girl is the one
Grammar
that
Girl.
kind of founded that, right?
Yeah. So, I think an SEO strategy works no matter the content. Again, maybe need to blog on non-podcast days. Because if you're new and trying to build authority, I have for 2 years, I talked about building authority. Podcasters didn't get it. And I had to you got to build authority, because when I started my podcast, I was nobody. I was in the Navy. I worked on airplanes. I had a blog. It was horrible. I had no authority in the space. I had, I like to talk about tech. I built my authority over time. And for someone new in this space, it takes a couple of years to build authority. And what is authority? Authority is people believing you're the authority and Google believing you're the authority.
Yeah. It's a factor of trust too. It's a factor of, authority is built on trust, because Todd, you are a curator, right?
Right.
So what you talk about in your podcast must be important. And that's based on your expertise and your experience.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what's funny is you can get political in a tech blog without getting political. So there's lots of ways to skin a cat in creating content, because you can talk about policy. And again, we don't need to get into that, but it's just like you can build you don't have to be an expert. You can have an opinion on something and say, do we deserve this as a world or as a community? And if we don't, call your senator or whatever it may be. And you can build yourself and as authority figure in whatever content you do.
Yeah. So if anybody else wants to ask any questions, go ahead and jump in.
Greg, did you have something you wanted to check in on? Just
No, it's okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks for answering that question. It was really good. And the whole content of it was really, really good. Thank you very much.
okay, great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, we're sort of getting up to wrap up time, but yeah, I think it's been really interesting. It's really interesting the way that you're thinking about things. And I think that I may have led the direction for Mark there early in saying like, oh, it's got to be new content, right? If as opposed to evergreen. I think it's just like there's different ways to go about it. And the idea is some people are going to search about what's new, what's the news, what just happened. And some people are going to say, how do I incorporate in my business, and then you can have that content, and that's probably going to be good for a while.
It's really interesting, the sort of debate as a podcaster. Do you look for creating loyal followers, raving fans that are going to come to your website, to your podcast every week because they want to hear what you're saying, versus if you hit the new subscribers, the new people coming, the new traffic, that slightly changes your podcast and how you're presenting it and how the style that you do it, because
right.
I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong, but it just shows you that there's different ways of being able to work this podcasting thing out, and actually
right.
There's no perfect answer for either version.
But you can build raving fans of your show. I have raving haters that listen to my show and write me email all the time because they don't they don't agree with my opinion on topics. So, and at the same time, you can address the new listeners, and I address the new listeners every episode at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah.
Because I know there's new listeners there waiting for instruction on how to subscribe to the show. And another thing I do weird about my show is I spend 10 minutes talking about what's going on before I get into the content. And the new listeners often have to be reminded this is just the format of the show. And if you don't like it, go on. Or if you do, if you want to get to the meat, jump to the 10-minute mark. But usually people then they get to know me and everything that's going on. So that's how I build a family. I consider my podcast audience my family, and I talk to them like my family. And sometimes, like when we're on Thanksgiving table, or or at a holiday or something where we're all arguing. Yeah, that's just my style.
Well, Todd and I's show that we do together twice a week is a good hybrid model, I think, between being a news topic show and a topic that, or a show that has some longer term value, right? Where you take news and you twist it into trends, right? And the trends that are indicative from the news are bigger topics, right? Those are topics that drive longer term discussion about importance. So let's say the merger of when Spotify acquired some new advertising platform. Well, what's the implications of that on the Uber trends around podcast advertising, right? So we can talk into what the future of podcast advertising is, and it's triggered based on this news story. So, and I know, Todd, you kind of do that a little bit too on your show, and I just wonder what kind of factor that is.
Well, anytime you can, what I've been talking about on my personal show lately. Okay, what does the election mean for the FCC, for the FAA, or some of these organizations are going to have change in people? What does it mean for privacy on the internet? So I can, you can use current events, what's going on, based upon maybe a story that's come up to drive a lot of conversation or a lot of thought by the audience. It doesn't necessarily make Google happy, but my audience gets engaged.
Right. Yeah. I think we're out of time.
Just about out of time. Yeah. And, yep, I'm okay if anybody wanted to stand any longer, but also we can all jump out too. Just want to put that out there. But yes, we are definitely out out of time. You want to wrap up, Rob?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks, Todd, for coming in and sharing all that. I think it's definitely a valuable topic right now. And the more people that understand the dynamics around this, I think the better for the podcasting space. So thanks for coming in and creating the conversation.
Yeah, it's also useful to have you. It seems very intuitive for you, and just for you to share how you're thinking about things. You go, oh yeah, this is what I did. This is what I'm catching a lot of things that are obvious to you, but might not be obvious to others. So definitely appreciate you just chatting about it.
Well, after you've been doing this about 16 years, it becomes intuitive. So anyway, if any questions, Todd@blueberry.com.
Awesome.
Terrific.
Should we sign off?
Sure.
Thanks very much, guys.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. So next week, anybody can jump off if they need to, but I'll just say to the people who showed up, next week we'll have another session without a guest. What we usually do is we just sit down and we discuss a little bit more in detail what we talked about today with Todd. So he won't be here next week, but Rob will be here, Vinay will be here, and Henry should be here as well. And we'll go over these. We'll talk about podcast SDO. And if I get a chance, I'll also send out an email to folks that gives a little bit of maybe a do now kind of an assignment type of thing you might try based on what we talked about with Todd. So hopefully check your email and we'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot. Have a good day over there.
Yep.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.